I'd like to tell you a secret. It's a secret that can enhance and enrich your life. It's something that can bring you a deeper sense of meaning and purpose and fulfillment. And it's something that can help you be more compassionate. But it's the kind of secret that hides in plain sight. It's there all the time. It flits around the periphery of your awareness, and you don't see it because you don't want to. So what is this elusive yet life-enhancing secret? You're going to die. You're going to die, and everyone you know is going to die. Now, you may be thinking a number of different things at the moment. Some of you may be thinking, I don't want to think about that. That's depressing. That's morbid. How can thinking about death be life-enhancing? And some of you may just be thinking, this guy's crazy. I know I'm going to die. Everyone knows they're going to die. But how much do we really think about it? How much do we really think about it? Probably, mostly, not much. And I'd argue that something that is obvious and inevitable that we don't think about or don't want to think about is something that we're trying to keep a secret from ourselves. Now, I think that's a shame. It's a problem, in fact. It's quite natural. I sympathize that we don't want to think about death. But it's a problem. It's a problem because it makes it harder for us to live meaningfully and compassionately. So we're going to be reflecting a bit more about our own mortality. But before we do that, I'd like to look at what some of the effects are of trying to keep at bay an awareness of our death. Because there's a whole school of psychology devoted to looking at the defense mechanisms that we have that stop us really thinking about our own mortality. And this school of psychology is called terror management theory. And here is a typical terror management theory study to give you an idea of how this works. So this was an actual study carried out by Professor Jeff Greenberg of the University of Arizona in the German city of Magdeburg. So you go out onto the streets and you ask people a bunch of questions. You tell them that it's a survey about consumer attitudes. And you ask them questions like, imagine you could go on vacation anywhere in Europe. Would you go to France? Would you go to Germany? Would you go to Italy? Would you go to Spain? If you were going to replace your current car, would you replace it with a Korean car, a Japanese car, a German car, etc.? Even questions like, how do you think Germany is going to do in the World Cup? I can hear myself talking. Thank you. So you ask all these questions, but you ask some people these questions on a regular shopping street, and you ask other people these questions outside a graveyard. Now, the fascinating thing is that you get very, very different responses depending on where you ask people these questions. People who are asked these questions outside the cemetery give answers that are much more nationalistic. They are going to go on vacation in Germany. They're going to buy a German car, and Germany is going to win the World Cup. And this is very curious. Why should this be? Well, psychologists call the cemetery mortality salience condition, which is just a phrase meaning something that reminds you that you're going to die. And what happens when we see the cemetery is that on some level there is fear. We may not feel it consciously, but on some level there's fear, and a defense mechanism kicks in. We try to find some kind of buffer that will keep at bay our anxiety about death. And in this particular case, the buffer that people were choosing was their nationality. They became more nationalistic. And the reason for this, presumably, is because our nation is more stable than we are. It's longer lasting than we are. Individual lives come and go, but the nation endures. So if we identify with our nation, we're identifying with something that has more permanence. And so we feel more of a sense of security. Now this is not, one other thing is that not only were people more pro-German, significantly they were also much more critical of things that were not German as well. Down to thinking that people who appeared on German television game shows were better looking than people who appeared on foreign game shows. Now this is not a German phenomenon by any means, this is a human phenomenon, and there have been many, many terror management theory studies done in different parts of the world, including in the US. So Abraham Rosenblatt of UCSF did a really fascinating study with US judges. He asked judges to set bail in cases of alleged prostitution. Now, these cases were fictional, which is a very good thing for reasons that you'll see. Half of the judges were presented with a mortality salience condition. They were reminded of their own deaths by being given a question in a questionnaire that asked them about their views of the afterlife. Now those judges, the ones who had been reminded of their own deaths, set bail 9 times higher than the other judges. 9 times. It's a really very, very striking result. Now obviously the judges here were not clinging to their nationality. They were identifying with something more like their religious views or their moral views. They were becoming more moralistic. And in doing so, they were becoming a bit, harsher, more punitive. So this is the first way of thinking about death, which is not really thinking about it. It's trying to buffer ourselves against thoughts of death, trying to keep our mortality at the periphery of our awareness by identifying with something more permanent than ourselves. But there are other ways to think about death. Rather than try to run away from death, we can turn toward it. Rather than trying to avoid thoughts of our own mortality, we can invite them in. And so we're going to be doing some reflections on our own mortality. Reflections which I think you'll find life-enhancing and conducive to compassion. And I'd like to start by calling to mind a maxim. It's something you may have heard before, that very few people on their deathbeds say, "I wish I'd spent more time in the office." This is a very useful reflection to do, just to put yourself in the situation of imagining that you're on your deathbed, looking back at your life. What would be important to you? What would you want to remember with a sense of fulfillment? What kind of things would you want not to regret? Now this kind of reflection, although we're calling to mind our death, actually becomes life-enhancing because we think more about our lives. We think more about what we value in life. We think more about our values. And what people typically find is that in thinking about their lives and how they want to live their lives in the light of their eventual demise, they realize that they want to live meaningfully. They want to have loved and been loved. They want to have lived joyfully. Now, I'm not suggesting that we obsess about death. That would be very unhelpful, it would be morbid, and it would be depressing. But if we don't take death into account, then our life becomes less meaningful. It's death, in fact, that gives life its meaning. Now, this kind of reflection, where an awareness of mortality can be life-enhancing, can be extended to other people as well. So Professor Eric D. Miller of Kent State University got couples to come in and reflect on the death of their spouse. Now, you might think that would be really depressing, but actually it wasn't. People found that they appreciated their spouse more. There was an enhancement of appreciation and love and compassion and even forgiveness toward their spouse. The things that people inevitably focus on, the negative little irritating things about our partners, were forgotten about. They were less important. And what came into focus was that our time together is brief. And because it's brief, it's precious. And because it's precious, we want to make the most of it. Now, I will just note briefly that fear can come up when we're doing this kind of exercise. Fear and sadness can come up. But just don't be afraid of fear. Fear is okay. If fear arises, just be with it. As it were, surf on the waves of fear as they arise, and you'll come out through the other end into compassion. Now, you might think, well, it's easy enough to develop compassion for our spouses, perhaps. But what about those relationships that are more difficult, more charged, more loaded with ill will, perhaps hurt, fear? You might think, well, I have relationships like that, and I'd like to reflect on the deaths of those people, but that's not quite where I'm going. We're going a slightly different direction. So I'd like you to call to mind someone that you have difficulty with. You might want to see them in your mind's eye. It might help if you close your eyes. See them in your mind's eye. Call this person to mind. And think about the thing that really bothers you about them. That thing that they do, the thing that they said or that they say that stirs up those negative feelings. Okay, so you got that? Okay, now keep that person in your mind's eye. And on the left-hand side of them, imagine them as a baby, a 10-month-old baby, not quite at the stage of walking or talking, just sitting on the floor beside them. On the other side, the right side of them, imagine them now as a very old person. They're aged, withered, frail, as old as you can get and still be hanging onto life. So now you have 3 versions of this person in front of you: past, present, and future. See those and call to mind once again that thing that they do that really bothers you. You may find that in this moment, it's not even possible to think a critical thought about this other person. I've done this exercise with many people, and there's 2 responses that come up over and over again. There's sadness. People often feel sad. And they feel sad because they're looking at the complexity or a representation of the complexity of someone's life, this incredibly rich, full thing. And what we're doing, we're plucking something from that life and relating to it in a negative way. And we realize when we're doing that, that we've let the other person down, and we've let ourselves down. People feel compassion because they realize it's not all about me. We've been focusing on, I feel hurt, I feel angry, this person makes life difficult for me. And we realize there is this other life there. And that life inevitably has its own difficulties too. Now, I came up with this reflection quite spontaneously in relation to my daughter. When she was about 3 or 4 years old, she would have really terrible tantrums. She was a real drama queen. And she would be lying on the floor, kicking and screaming and spitting and yelling, the whole works. And in trying to deal with this, I would very often remember what she was like just a few years earlier when she was a baby. So open, so curious, so happy, so completely incapable of experiencing the emotion of anger or hatred. These are things we have to learn. And I would imagine her also as she was going to become. I would imagine her as a young woman, perhaps in her 20s, much more mature and stable, and she's a very smart girl, so I imagine her as having quite a bit of wisdom under her belt by that time. And I would realize that she was going through an incredible process of transformation, from on the one hand, complete dependence, to on the other hand, independence. And I would become aware of what an amazing and difficult transition this must be. And I would also realize that my job as a father was to be a compassionate presence toward her, to help her make this transition. Now, this reminds us of something else, that life is difficult, life is a challenge. It's complicated, it's confusing. Think about this in relation to your own life right now. You want to be happy, and yet isn't happiness so often elusive? We don't want to suffer, and yet suffering in various forms, anxiety, disappointment, keeps blindsiding us, over and over again. So think about this in relation to your own life. If you can recognize the truth of that, see if you can find some compassion for yourself right now as you're going through this difficult thing that we do, that we call life. And if you can do that for yourself, see if you can recognize that this is true for other people as well. A 19th century Scottish theologian is famous for having said, be compassionate, for everyone is fighting a hard battle. So as we remember that other people are going through their own struggles as well, we can see if we can be a compassionate presence for them too. Now, I'm not saying it's necessarily easy to do this. Actually, the most difficult thing is remembering to use the kind of reflections that I've been introducing here. But the great thing is that there are reminders all around us. The brevity of life, the brief time that we have together, that brief, precious time that we have together. The fact that life is frequently difficult and confusing. Those things are there all the time, and all we have to do is not let them be a secret and look at them. Thank you very much.